Back in 2016, the World Economic Forum published an article titled, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." Authored by Ida Auken, a member of the Danish Parliament and former Minister for the Environment, the piece envisioned a future where personal ownership was obsolete and services shared freely. Imagine a Star Trek future with replicators and no need for money. Technology is advanced enough that we don't have to work. All our time can be spent on artistic pursuits and hobbies, our personal well-being, developing our relationships. We don't care about possessions, we care about experiences. It was just one vision of a potential utopian future, but reactions to the article were less than positive. Over the past decade, the phrase, "you'll own nothing and be happy," has turned into a pretty apt representation of a lot of our experiences living under late-stage capitalism, where companies are increasingly eroding the meaning of ownership, turning everything into a subscription model, leaving us, the average citizen, paying month after month after month after month to continue to access content that we used to be able to buy once and own forever. This is not Auken's vision of a future with freely shared resources and technology being utilized to actually improve the lives of every single citizen. This is a corporate oligarchy that is wringing our wallets dry at literally any cost. And while the subscription model has largely taken over the digital realms of music and film and TV and video games, ebooks felt like one of the few remaining forms of art or media that we could purchase once and own for a lifetime. One of the last true bastions of traditional ownership in the digital age. But what if that was just an illusion? Recently, it was discovered that Kindle, the most popular e-reader platform on planet Earth, owned by Amazon and with over 30 million users in the US alone, was quietly implementing a change in policy going into effect on the 26th of February 2025 that removes users' ability to back up their Kindle ebooks to a non-Kindle device. With the removal of this feature, users will be required to access their ebooks solely through Wi-Fi enabled Kindle devices, raising concerns about the permanence of our digital libraries and our ability to control the things that we've purchased with our hard-earned money. And the book community is understandably in a bit of an uproar. Many fear the signals a move toward a model where access to books is controlled by platforms and publishers and providers, and a move to a future where ownership is a relic of the past. So, is this the beginning of the end? Is this the final horseman of the digital ownership apocalypse where ebooks are following in the footsteps of every other form of digital media toward a subscription or licensing-based model? Or have we already passed the point of no return without even realizing it? In this video, I'll explore how we're sleepwalking into a dystopian future where you'll own nothing and be happy about it, where publishers and platforms and governments can change the content of the books in your digital library or delete them altogether at any time. For most of history, book ownership has been limited by wealth, class, and literacy rates. Pre-15th century, books were exclusively handwritten manuscripts. They were extremely expensive to produce or purchase and were primarily owned by the church, scholars, and the nobility. After the invention of the printing press, books became more widely available, but they were still extremely expensive and really only accessible to the upper and middle classes. Over time, a focus on improving literacy, public education, and mass production, books became more affordable and more accessible. By the 21st century, we have bookstores and libraries and public schools. Books are more accessible than ever, but they still take money to purchase and physical space to store. The shift to digital media changed everything. While ebooks and audiobooks increased accessibility, they also widened the digital divide. Those without internet access or reliable devices are left behind. But moving into the digital age also introduced a new question. Do we actually own digital media that we buy? With physical media, it's easy. If you buy a CD or a DVD or a physical book, you know you own it, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can store it on your shelf, you can lend it to a friend, you could sell it to your neighbor, you could put it in a box and leave it in your basement for 15 years. You own that object, and it's up to you what you do with it. But with digital media, ownership means something completely different. Often when we buy digital music or books or video games, we're purchasing a license to view or use that media, not purchasing a copy that we actually legally own. There are a lot of restrictions on what we can do with the digital media we buy. The first is that most ebooks have DRM. This restricts copying, sharing, or transferring files. Some platforms do sell DRM-free ebooks, but that is the exception, not the rule. Buying an ebook license means paying for access under a company's terms, not actually owning it. This shift gives corporations more control over digital media while eroding readers' rights. Also, most platforms that sell ebooks maintain the right to revoke access at any time. If a service shuts down, or you lose access to your account, or they lose the license for that book from the publisher, your content is gone. In the digital world, we often don't own our ebooks, we just borrow them until the company says otherwise. Sound like a dystopia yet? So at this point, you might be wondering, if every time we buy an ebook, we're just renting it, how is this change from Kindle really anything new? And the answer is, it's not. But also it is. Ebooks from Kindle have always been DRM protected, and they've always been technically a license, not a true purchase. But this information was not necessarily clearly communicated to the user, and at least there was an option to back up your books to another location in case something happened with your account, or say your Kindle device exploded, or God forbid, you decide to leave the Kindle ecosystem altogether and go to a different e-reader, you could potentially take the books you bought with you. This is no longer an option. Any books you purchase from Kindle after February 26th, or any books that you purchased pre-February 26th that you haven't backed up, are going to exist in your digital library at the sole whim of Kindle and Amazon themselves. Any change in licensing, any edits they want to make to the text, any books they decide to remove from their platform are going to be edited or changed or taken away. And again, if they decide to revoke your account for any reason whatsoever, you lose your entire library. Now, if you've only purchased 5 ebooks in the last 10 years, this is probably not going to affect you. But if you have thousands of ebooks that you have spent your money on, even if each ebook was only 99 cents, we're talking about some serious money and a serious investment that is at risk of being deleted with no warning and no reprisal. So while a post-scarcity world sounds really great in theory, you'll own nothing and be happy has become a warning, if not a promise. A shift toward mass dependency on companies, loss of property rights, and ultimately corporate and government control over what media you can and can't access and consume. And that's where things get dangerous, folks, because history has already shown us what can happen when access to information is heavily controlled. One of the first steps in any authoritarian regime is to control access to knowledge and information, especially through books. Because if you can control what people read, you can control how they think. And what starts with restrictive access can turn into book bans, censorship, and rewriting history. It's easy to think of the idea of heavy censorship of books or book banning as a relic of the past, but it's happening right now. And in some ways, in the digital age, censorship of books is easier than it has ever been. States like Florida and Texas have seen an explosion of book bans recently, mostly focusing on books from diverse perspectives, whether they're talking about race or LGBTQI+ issues or disability and history. A digital book can be heavily edited, changed, or removed without notice. For example, in 2009, Amazon removed copies of 1984 and Animal Farm from users' Kindles without notice because of a copyright issue. Publishers are also getting into the habit of silently editing digital versions of books post-publication, whether it's to correct an honest mistake or a typo, or for more nefarious reasons. This ability to quietly edit the text of the books we own is concerning and should be concerning. If a platform decides a book is problematic, and who defines what that means, they can delete it from their platforms and therefore your library. What happens when platforms decide that books on race and books about disability or queerness are problematic and shouldn't exist? Do those books cease to exist in our libraries? Do they cease to exist online? Is that access removed altogether? Who makes these decisions? Who gets to control our access to books? Again, these are dangerous precedents to set. These are dangerous regulations for us all to go along with no complaint. Hopefully everyone is still learning about how propaganda works in schools, but censorship of information, editing and censorship and banning of books is such a powerful tool in propaganda and the controlling of thought of a whole generation of people. And it's not just about having the latest romantasy release suddenly removed from your library. It's about freedom of expression and freedom of access to art and thought. The future and honestly present of book censorship isn't a big bonfire in the town square. It's a silent, invisible edit. There's this common saying, history is written by the victors. And it means a whole plethora of things, but one of the things it means is that history books are not full of objective truth. They are a narrative, they are a story being told by whoever won the war. But at least when books were physical, it took a lot more effort to round up all physical copies of a book that had some truth that was no longer supported by whoever was in power and eliminate them from existence. If a book exists only in the digital space, it is incredibly easy to, with a single click, send out an update to every copy on planet Earth and change it to fit a new narrative without anyone being the wiser. How do we determine what the correct version of a book is? How do we know that every person reading a book is even reading the same text when changes can be made so easily? As books move more and more into the digital space, we're not only risking losing access to our books, but we're also risking losing the right to read anything that hasn't been pre-approved by governments or corporations. In the past, books were burned. In the present, books are banned. In the future, books will simply be deleted. I don't know about you, but I was assigned 1984 by George Orwell in high school. And one of the core concepts of this book is that history is easily rewritten. And people are trained to accept any new truth, no matter how contradictory it might be, without question. 1984 is a classic piece of dystopian literature imagining a future where people are controlled through language and knowledge. And if you can't draw any parallels there, I don't know what to tell you. 1984 has stood the test of time because over the decades it becomes more and more relevant and more real. When people were reading 1984 when it was first published, I don't think they could have imagined the kind of future we would willingly walk into, selling our rights piece by piece for the conveniences of a digital age. And you know what? I'm old enough to remember the rhetoric around the internet in the 90s and early 2000s. There was this idea that the internet was going to be a democratizing force, that it was going to create free access to all information, to all knowledge for everyone. It was going to level the playing field. It was going to be the age of information. We were going to set ourselves free. Regardless of wealth or status, each person would have access to the entirety of human knowledge and art and experience with a single click. But the reality is, there's no money in free access to information for everyone. And there's not enough money for corporations or shareholders in buy once, own forever. We don't live in Ocker or Star Trek's post-scarcity utopia. Corporate greed is an insatiable beast, and we are the meal. The internet was supposed to set information free. Instead, it's all locked behind paywalls and subscriptions and licenses. This change that Kindle's making isn't some brand new, never before seen betrayal of its users. It's just highlighting the long-standing reality that we don't own the ebooks we buy. And the concept of ownership as a whole will continue to erode if we don't make a stand. We dreamed of a technologically advanced utopia where we could be free to focus on the things that really matter in life. Instead, what we got was a corporate dystopia where even the books on our shelves can vanish overnight. So, no, this change from Kindle isn't anything new. But yes, we should be worried. And yes, we should be angry, because this is not the future we all dreamed of and have worked so hard to build. The reality is we don't live in a post-scarcity world. Not even close. We live in a world where corporations invent scarcity to force us to pay in perpetuity for what should have already been ours. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I can't wait to read your comments and talk more about this. Don't forget to back up all of your Kindle ebooks before the 26th, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.